Welcome to this edition of Legislative Watch, where public policy is openly discussed and elected officials are able to report their activities directly to the people, unfiltered and unbridled. I'm your host, Elizabeth Allen Hodge. Today my guests are Representative Grant Burgoyne, Democrat from District 16, House Seat A, and Representative John Vander Woude, Republican representing the good folks in District 21, Seat A. Welcome, gentlemen.
Thank you.
Good to be here.
Last week we spoke with former Idaho State Legislator Bob Foy, who along with you apparently is working with a group of citizens concerning some of the activities of the Idaho Land Board. So Grant, I'd like to start with you, and as a recap, tell us a little bit about the Idaho Land Board, what they do, who the board of directors are, and what the concern of so many business owners might be.
Well, thank you, Elizabeth. The Idaho Land Board is the governor, the Secretary of State, the Attorney General, the Superintendent of Public Instruction, and the Controller.
All constitutional officers.
All constitutional officers, all elected statewide. And they're responsible for managing the lands that are held by the various endowments in the state. Probably the one that your listeners know the best is the Public School Endowment. And when Idaho became a state, the federal government granted a great deal of land in Idaho to the state for the benefit of the schools and for other purposes. And so the Land Board's job is to manage those lands and to make decisions about the lands, trading the lands, selling the lands, buying lands to replace lands that are sold.
Okay. Now, my understanding is that the concern of some of the citizens, the people that we've talked to, is that the Land Board is now engaged in purchasing land or trading land, and some of the land that they are buying has businesses established on them already that are now going to be state-owned, and that those state-owned businesses will not have to pay certain taxes that their competition does pay. Would you like to address that, John?
That's correct. And there's been a change. They have long been in the business of exchanging lands. So they have gotten rid of different properties and done some exchanges. It wasn't until about a year and a half ago that they actually purchased a business instead of just land. They have a fair amount of commercial land here in Boise, which is, once it's owned by the endowment, it goes off the tax rolls. And so, but this past year they actually purchased a storage unit that took it off of the tax rolls, and the income and everything now goes to the endowment. So they have almost switched in philosophy to now starting to go and actually purchasing businesses instead of just commercial parking lots. They own a lot of parking lots. They own a lot of buildings that actually are now leased to government agencies. And so they have broadened their scope of what they were trying to do.
Now, okay, so they, on the storage unit that you're talking about, as I recall, Bob said that they've also got, that they've hired somebody to operate that for them?
Yeah, they have a manager that's running it for him, but the DBA is in the name of the state of Idaho.
Okay,
the license to do business is held by the state.
Okay, so I'll ask a question of you gentlemen that I asked of Bob that he couldn't answer, is if that person is now hired by them, is he or she a state employee?
I think that is an excellent question. Here's what happened, and here's what I think is permissible. I think under current law and under the Constitution, it's permissible for the Land Board, when it's sold land and it has money in what's called a land bank, to go out and buy additional land. The Constitution and the statutes make clear that they have the authority to buy land. It doesn't say anything about buying a legal entity like a corporation or a limited liability company. It doesn't say anything about purchasing a business. And so we know that land has been defined by the courts to be the land and the improvements on the land. So what should have happened here is that they should have bought the land, and then they would have the affordable storage units and the buildings that go with that. And then they could lease that to an entity, to a corporation or to a limited liability company, which would be owned by a private person. That private person would run and operate the business. They would pay income taxes if they had a profit. and it would
What
be.
about property taxes?
Well, they would not have to pay. They would not have to pay property taxes unless the state of Idaho then said, "Well, we're going to charge you the equivalent of what would amount to the property taxes," because the state, as the landlord, wouldn't owe the property taxes to Ada County or Boise City. Now, as far as whether or not, under the current arrangement, where the state of Idaho is actually the owner of the business entity, a limited liability company, then the issue becomes whether or not the people who work in the affordable storage units, whether they are state employees. And I think you raise a very interesting question.
Well, because if they are, then are they not entitled to the benefits of state employees? And I mean, the business already is at an advantage because tax-wise, they don't have to pay income tax or property tax. A storage unit that could be right across the street from them doesn't have that same luxury.
Yeah, they would. Yeah, anybody that's going to compete with them is looking at a 3 to 4% disadvantage because they have to pay the property tax that is due on the property, and as the assessment goes up, anything that goes to the schools, the fire department, all the fire, police, all the public protection that we are all paying for on our property tax, this storage unit is not paying for. I mean, if a fire starts, the fire department will come there and put it out, but they're not paying anything towards the local authorities and taxes. And so they would have an unfair advantage in that aspect.
Well, they in fact do have an unfair
Right.
advantage because whether somebody's across the street or down the street, they're not operating on the same playing field. It's not a level playing field.
No.
It's the job of government to create a level playing field in which businesses compete with each other. The government shouldn't be taking side in private businesses, let alone being the owner of a private business and taking its own side and getting its own unfair advantage in this process.
Well, and in today's economy, where we have businesses that are just doing their best just to keep their head above water, if this practice is allowed to continue, what's to keep them from going into other businesses and other entities, and what's to keep them from expanding? What's to keep the government from going even further?
Not only is there nothing to limit them from expanding this activity, in fact, there is discussion and I think a desire on the part of the Idaho Department of Lands and the Land Board to expand these activities. There were a couple of citizen-type commissions that were put together to advise the Land Board and to advise the Department of Lands, which proposed taking the cap off the sale of public lands, and which suggested that we should amend the Constitution so that land transactions wouldn't always be open to public bidding. And if you stop and think about the implications of that, if those constitutional amendments were passed, we could be in a situation where the Land Board could constitutionally decide to sell all of the public lands that are currently held, and then you'd be dealing with approximately $5 billion in cash and passive assets that are invested through the Endowment Fund Investment Board, and then that money could be used to go out and buy businesses and compete with private enterprise in the state of Idaho. Now think about that much capital going into the private marketplace. I'm not saying that I think the Land Board presently has those intentions, but as we have elections and personalities on the Land Board change over the years, how do we know what will happen in 10 or 20 years? So there's a broader agenda at work by some people to loosen the restrictions on these endowment lands in a way that I think could be very harmful to the state and to its economy.
When you say not open to public bidding, then they determine who can. Help me understand it a little bit more.
The current procedure is anytime you sell land, it has to go through auction. Mm-hmm. They want to change that procedure. They want to make it so that if they are to dispose of land, and they're looking at cottage sites at Payette and Priest Lake, they want to make it so that they can actually move that land through their own kind of real estate office or whatever without public auction, so that they could just buy and sell this property at their own options, instead of going through the
And they're
auction.
looking at cottages, you say? So that we won't even need tourism Department of
we don't,
Commerce pretty soon.
We haven't seen a bill yet come from anybody proposing an actual constitutional amendment. But there were recommendations in these citizen reports along these lines. So until we see a bill, we don't know exactly what the scope of the changes would be. But it's very concerning to me to have the government do anything with respect to our lands that doesn't involve public bidding. That's the transparency that we need to be sure that we've got an honest system.
Well, there's a lot of talk about transparency, but sometimes the talk is just that. And this is what upsets people, and rightly so. I understand that we have an RS that's going to be introduced, and that both of you gentlemen are co-sponsoring it. Yeah. And so I'll hand it back and let you discuss a little bit about how you came to writing it the way you did and what the purpose is.
Well, last session, the 2011 session, Representative Bob Schaefer and local attorney John Rumpft got together and came up with a bill that would essentially require the Land Board to dispose of the business entity, the affordable storage units, and would prevent them from acquiring other retail-type businesses. The legislation got an informational hearing in the House last session, and an interim committee, the Natural Resources Committee, was then charged with conducting further hearings and investigations regarding the issue. And so between the two legislative sessions, John and I were appointed as ad hoc members to that committee, and we participated in presenting the proposal to the committee and got feedback from the committee about what they'd like to see. And ultimately, they supported the legislation, endorsed the legislation, and encouraged the two bodies, the Senate and the House, to take it up. We revised the bill a little bit for this session, and we have it ready to go, and there will be a hearing next Tuesday, I believe, in the House Natural Resources Committee, a print hearing of a decision on whether to introduce the bill or not.
Okay, so you're saying the one that they did last year didn't go anywhere?
Well, it just got an informational hearing and didn't get introduced as a bill.
It got printed as a bill, but then it was in State Affairs. We got the bill printed, and then it was sent to Natural Resources, where the chairman did not want to hear the bill, but we had discussions of the bill without the bill before the committee.
So what makes you think they want to hear it this year?
We've got assurances that they will hear the bill this year.
Is that in writing?
And I think
most people they realize that it is an issue, and we will get a hearing on the bill.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And I think some minds have been changed. I mean, I think the hearings that we had in the interim with the interim committee, they were enlightening. They were enlightening for us, and they were enlightening for members of the committee.
Well, let me ask both of you if in your districts you've talked to businessmen, and how many businessmen are even aware that the state can do this?
I think
businessmen and women.
Yeah,
I should say.
very few of them are aware even that they did it, that they actually bought a business and stuff like that. And I think prior to this year, I think hardly anybody knew what the Land Board was doing. Everybody was taking all this endowment money, it's coming to the schools, it's going to all these other endowment beneficiaries, but nobody was really watching to see what are they doing with their money, how are they handling it, until they bought this business that all of a sudden everybody says, wait a minute, let's look to see what they're looking at. And they have documents in their minutes where they were looking at hotels, fast food restaurants, any business opportunities that might come before them.
When we come back from the break, we want to explore this further, and I'd also like to know how they deal with insurance and liability when it's the state. We'll be right back.